Your dog wasn't born, it was designed, and the blueprint is terrifying. In 1873, a group of wealthy Victorians decided to play God with genetics. They launched the Kennel Club and started an obsession that prioritized ego over health. They didn't want a companion for you, they wanted a trophy for themselves. The result? The Victorian Explosion, a genetic bottleneck that engineered the dogs we have today. If you want to know why your purebred might actually be a broken medical nightmare, keep watching. This isn't nature, it's an industry. Victorian society's new obsession. You might think you know where your dog comes from. Maybe you imagine a slow, natural evolution over thousands of years. Wolves gradually becoming the pug sleeping on your couch. Well, that is a nice fairy tale, but the reality? It is way more sudden, and frankly, a little more disturbing. Welcome to the Victorian era. We often think of this time as factories, top hats, and strict morals. But underneath that stiff upper lip was a society obsessed with control. Historians and sociologists often point out that the Victorians didn't just want to conquer the world, they wanted to domesticate nature itself. And their number one target? Your best friend. Imagine walking down a street in London in 1850. The dogs you see aren't the distinct brands we know today. They are scruffy, functional, undefined. But just a few decades later, everything changes. This period is what experts call the Victorian Explosion. It wasn't just a trend, it was a societal fever. Here is the thing that might unsettle you. The dog breeds we cherish today didn't exist for the vast majority of human history. They were invented. And they were invented by people who cared more about status than biology. You have to ask yourself, was it really about loving dogs, or was it about showing off? The wealthy elite began to realize that a dog wasn't just a tool for hunting rats or guarding sheep anymore. It was a fashion accessory. Just like a fancy pocket watch or a silk dress, the dog at your side signaled your place in the social hierarchy. But what happens next will surprise you, because this obsession with status was about to turn into a full-blown industry. The rise of public dog shows. So, how do you prove your dog is better than your neighbors? You put them on a stage. This is where the concept of the dog show enters the picture. And trust me, it wasn't just a friendly gathering in the park. Think of it like the Instagram of the 19th century. If you weren't showing, you weren't relevant. The public went absolutely wild for these events. We have records of thousands of people flocking to venues, desperate to see these new types of animals. It was a spectacle. But here is the dark twist you probably haven't considered. Before these shows, a good dog was a dog that could do a job. Could it herd sheep? Could it catch a badger? Great. But inside the show ring, nobody cared if your dog could actually work. They only cared about how it looked. This shift from function to form is the exact moment the genetic destiny of dogs changed forever. You see, when you start breeding for applause rather than ability, you start making compromises. And this is where the ego comes in. Breeders weren't just owners, they were artists, and living, breathing animals were their canvas. Crufts, which eventually became the Super Bowl of dog shows, cemented this culture. It validated the idea that a dog could be a trophy. But as the competition heated up, things started to get messy. People were cheating, faking lineages, and arguing over what a spaniel actually was. They needed a referee. They needed a god to lay down the law. And that is exactly what they got. Founding. The Kennel Club in 1873. 1873. If you own a purebred dog, this date should be tattooed on your brain. This is the year. The Kennel Club was founded in the UK. Now, you might hear Kennel Club and think of a benevolent organization protecting puppies. Not exactly. It was created to bring order to the chaos of the dog world. It was the world's first official registry for dogs. Think of it as an exclusive country club, but for canine genetics. Before 1873, a dog breed was a loose concept. A terrier was just a small dog that dug holes. But the Kennel Club changed everything. They decided that to be a breed, you had to be on a list. You had to be registered. This sounds professional, right? But here's the catch they don't tell you in the history books. By closing the studbooks, meaning you could only breed registered dogs to other registered dogs, they artificially shrank the gene pool. Expert geneticists today look back at this moment as a bottleneck. They took a wide river of genetic diversity and forced it through a tiny straw. Why? To maintain purity. It is a word that sounds nice but carries a heavy, heavy price. This was the moment dogs stopped being individuals and became standardized products. And if you think that sounds cold, wait until you hear how they decided what those products should look like. Creating rigid breed standards. Enter the breed standards. This is literally a piece of paper that describes the perfect dog of a certain breed. It describes the curve of the tail, the set of the ears, the color of the eye. It sounds harmless, doesn't it? Just a manual. But think about it. Who wrote these standards? Was it veterinarians? Was it biologists? No, it was Victorian gentleman enthusiasts. They sat in rooms and decided, I think a bulldog should have a massive head and narrow hips. They were writing a fantasy. And then breeders had to twist biology to match that fantasy. This is where the Victorian Explosion really gets its name. Suddenly, you have this explosion of distinct shapes and sizes, all trying to conform to an arbitrary set of rules written by a committee. This is the part that usually makes people uncomfortable. When you prioritize a written rule over the health of the animal, you get problems. But in the Victorian era, perfection was the only goal. If the standard said a nose should be flat, breeders would make it flatter. If it said the back should be sloped, they would slope it until the dog could barely walk. It is a classic case of human ego overriding nature. We wanted to prove we could mold life to our specifications. And we succeeded. But at what cost? You are looking at the result of that experiment sleeping at the foot of your bed right now. Designing the perfect dog. Let's dig deeper into this explosion. We call it an explosion because the number of recognized breeds skyrocketed during this time. It was like a manufacturing boom. Wealthy Victorians would take a localized type of dog, isolate it, breed it with its cousins to lock in a specific trait, and boom! Brand new breed. Look at my new fox terrier. It is totally different from your fox terrier. It was the ultimate collector's game. But here is the unsettling truth. Many of these breeds were based on aesthetic whims. They wanted dogs that matched their interior decor or looked distinct enough to win a ribbon at Crufts. This is the era that gave us the modern versions of so many breeds. But unlike natural evolution, which selects for survival, this artificial selection selected for extreme features. You have to wonder, did they know what they were doing? Did they know they were baking health defects into the DNA of these animals? Some argue they were just ignorant. Others say they simply didn't care. The glory of the perfect dog was worth the sacrifice. But the motivation wasn't just vanity. It was rooted in a scientific philosophy that was sweeping the globe at the time. A philosophy that is, frankly, terrifying when you apply it to living things. The Influence of Eugenics. This is the part of the story most people gloss over. The Victorian Explosion wasn't just happening in a vacuum. It was heavily influenced by the rising popularity of eugenics. Eugenics is the idea that you can improve a population by controlled breeding to increase the occurrence of desirable, heritable characteristics. It is a controversial, ugly chapter in human history. But before it was applied to humans, it was practiced religiously on dogs. The Victorian dog breeders were the pioneers of this thinking. They believed that by ruthlessly culling imperfections and only breeding the purest specimens, they were creating a superior life form. The Kennel Club's closed registries were the ultimate eugenics experiment. They talked about blood purity and better breeding as if they were moral virtues. The dog show became the proving ground for these theories. If you could engineer a perfect dog, it validated the idea that you could engineer a perfect society. It sends a chill down your spine, doesn't it? Your lovable family pet was essentially a prototype for a scientific movement that would go on to cause immense suffering in the 20th century. They viewed the dog not as a companion with a soul, but as biological clay. And because they believed they were improving nature, They didn't stop to ask if a dog that couldn't breathe or give birth naturally was actually improved. They only asked if it was pure. The Victorian Explosion. Legacy. So, where does that leave us today? Look around. The Victorian Explosion is still happening. Every time you see a dog that has been bred to the extreme, you are seeing the ghost of 1873. The Kennel Club is still here. The breed standards are still here, and the legacy of that Victorian obsession is written in the DNA of millions of dogs. It is a heavy realization. We love our dogs. We treat them like family. But we have to acknowledge that the bodies they inhabit were designed by Victorian social climbers who were obsessed with eugenics and winning ribbons. But here's the silver lining. We are starting to wake up. Veterinary experts and modern scientists are finally challenging these old standards. We are realizing that maybe, just maybe, function should matter more than fashion. The next time you look at a pedigree chart, remember the Victorian Explosion. Remember that purebred is just a Victorian invention. And ask yourself, are we honoring our dogs, or are we just keeping a 150-year-old fashion trend alive? I will leave you with that thought, because once you know the history, you can never look at a dog show the same way again. Now you know that purebred is just a 150-year-old marketing term invented by the elite. Don't let them hide the history. Smash that subscribe button right now if you want the raw truth about dogs, not the fairy tale. And click this next video, because what you don't know about modern breeding could be hurting your best friend right now.